Hi everyone, this is 4.3, the Industrial Revolution. By the end of class, you'll be able to explain how the Industrial Revolution impacted the United States by analyzing how the North and South developed different economic systems. The Industrial Revolution began in Great Britain. The Industrial Revolution was the reorganization that took place as machines replaced hand tools. We also saw an increase of mass production, which is a production of goods in mass quantity. The causes of the Industrial Revolution were the Embargo Act of 1807 and the War of 1812. Essentially what happened during these times, the United States could no longer get goods from Great Britain, so they had to learn how to manufacture the goods themselves. And so the effect was a lot of domestic industries, a lot of domestic factories, especially in New England. We saw a large increase in textile industry. One of the most famous is the Lowell community, and mostly young women moved to this small town in New England, which eventually grew to be quite large because of textile manufacturing. We started to see two economic systems develop in this country, one in the North and one in the South. In the North, we started to see cities become more integrated or more crowded. People started moving into the cities. We saw small businesses and factories in these cities. In the more rural parts of the North, people had smaller farms that grew corn or just larger farms with livestock on it, which would be like cattle and pigs. And so there wasn't really a need for slaves in the North because corn didn't require a lot of manual labor and nor did the livestock, so you didn't tend to see a lot of need for slave labor. The South, however, was different. In the South, we saw the cotton gin, and the cotton gin was was a machine that was created by Eli Whitney, and what the cotton gin did was remove the seeds from the cotton without having to do it manually. They used to have to pull them out with their fingers, and now they were able to do it with this machine and do it much more quickly. So therefore, they were able to grow cotton a lot more cotton. And cotton was a very manual crop, and so they did need slave labor. So we saw an increase in slave labor in the South, and large farms and or plantations develop in the southern regions. We also began to see this idea or this concept of the American system. The American system was developed by Henry Clay, and the American system was this thought process or this idea about how to improve our country and how to make our country a little bit better. And a lot of focus on internal improvements, such as a national road. Actually, it was a toll road. You had to pay the first toll road. It was called the Turnpike. We also saw the Erie Canal begin to develop, which went from the Atlantic to the Great Lakes. For any of you that have ever been to Georgetown, the canal in Georgetown was part of this Erie Canal development. Henry Clay also reintroduced the National Bank and created the Tariff of 1816. The Tariff of 1816 was a protective tariff, meaning a protective tax. So it taxed goods from England so that people were more likely to buy American goods. We also saw the Supreme Court cases McCulloch versus Maryland and Givens versus Ogden. You read both of these in the last unit, but just kind of a reflection or a reminder. McCulloch versus Maryland focused or said the National Bank is necessary and proper, and said that states did not have the right to tax it. Therefore, the law of the land was the supreme law of the land. And Givens versus Ogden gave the federal government the ability to control trade. In addition to that, we saw this idea of nationalism develop. Nationalism was this idea that we wanted to focus on our own country, our own national interest. John Quincy Adams was the one who came up with this idea, or really tried to expand this idea. I shouldn't say he came up with it, but he really expanded this idea. When John Quincy Adams was president, he also expanded the territory into Oregon, and we saw him really expand westward. He also signed the Onis Treaty, which allowed us to gain control of Florida. During this time period, because again, we were focused more on our own country, we signed with the Monroe Doctrine. The Monroe Doctrine said that we would not interfere, or the United States would not interfere with issues in Europe as long as Europe didn't interfere with issues in the United States. Again, this idea of nationalism, this idea that we're only focused on ourselves and the development of our own country. One issue that arose during this time period, and again kind of shows the contrast between the North and the South, was how to add states to the Union and keep the balance between slave states and non-slave states. So Missouri wanted to be added to the Union, but wanted to be added as a slave state. And nobody wanted to add Missouri to the Union. I shouldn't say the North didn't want to add Missouri to the Union as a slave state because of the fact that then that would throw off the balance between slave and non-slave. So what they decided to do is add Missouri as a slave state, but then they were going to add Maine as a non-slave state or a free state in order to keep that balance between free states and slave states. And that is it for today.